I was at the Las Vegas shooting that happened back in October of 2017. Front and center, as close as we could possibly get. We were really in the thick of the huge sea of people. Thousands of people were there. And what sounded like fireworks started during the middle of Jason Aldean's fourth song. You could see people looking around for fireworks because initially that's what it sounded like. And I think you hear things like that and you're out in Las Vegas and it's crazy. I don't think anyone had in their mind gunfire. So we're looking for that, see nothing. It goes kind of quiet and then quickly again you hear more, and it's rapid popping sounds. I was actually filming the song that Jason Aldean was performing at the time, and all of a sudden you see his security rush him off stage, and I look over across the people standing to my right in the direction where the sound was coming from, and I see people start like going down. Intense panic sets in. We all dive to the ground. There's just massive people piling down on the ground around us. It's basically just intense chaos from that moment on. In my mind, because it sounds so close, and at that point I'm registering it as gunshots. I've never heard really gunshots like that in person in my life. Even in that moment, I'm only registering it as that because of how I see everyone else panicking. I'm hearing people yell to get down, and I feel in that moment that there's people that had somehow gotten into the outdoor arena and are in there shooting at everyone. And I'm thinking there's multiple people because it's just a hailstorm of gunshots, and it's just not letting up. It's rapid fire. I'm thinking there's no way it's from a distance. There's no way it's only one person. And I have a family I have to get home to. I waited until the first lull in gunfire to try to get up to run. And I finally get up to try to run. More gunfire starts. I'm seeing people shot all around me. I'm running in the direction away from where it sounded like all of the gunfire was coming from. And I'm basically just in my mind coming to terms with I'm going to get shot down as I'm running away from all this. And I just need to know that I tried to get out of here to get home to my family. There's a few other brief moments of hearing no gunfire, but there's such an intense panic that's set in with everyone that it's just complete chaos. I had no one there with me. I was completely alone, but in this sea of thousands of strangers, and we're all just running for our lives. I ran through where people had basically just bulldozed over the arena gates to get out. I climbed over gates and fences, just running through that kind of side streets off the strip, just trying to get as far away from where the gunfire was as possible.
Hello and welcome to Big Talk Little Greek. Today we're talking about a very intense subject. I have my friend Michele Fiester here, and Michele and I have something that we found is very in common. We both had very traumatic events in our life. My event was over a long period of time. It had to do with my upbringing and abuse that I experienced in a cult that I was raised in. And Michele had a traumatic event that was more brief, and it was kind of all contained to one day. So we're going to talk today about our experiences that we had and how those experiences have shaped how we feel during this time, during the coronavirus and all that's going on in the world, and the anxiety that we feel, and sometimes the depression that we feel, and how people who have had traumatic experiences have kind of a different take on what's been going on. My mom remarried my stepdad when I was about 11 years old. I think we started living with him when I was 13. And for basically 10 years, when I lived with him, he was what you would call like a cult leader. A pretty typical cult leader. He was narcissistic, everything. He was very abusive to me and my mother, mostly verbally, very controlling, wouldn't allow us to do anything, say anything without permission. And so I was kind of thrown into that at like a really transitional part of my life. Some of the biggest like growth periods when you're like 13 and you're trying to figure out like who you are every day. And then all of a sudden I'm living with this stranger who won't even acknowledge. He used to not even acknowledge my presence. And if he wanted to say something to me, he would tell my mother and then she would come report it. So it's just a really weird environment. And as he got more comfortable being around me, the abuse that he was giving only to my mother started to come off on me too. And so a lot of that, like I mentioned before, was control. A lot of it, most of it was very verbal abuse. So his favorite thing, he was an insomniac. He wouldn't sleep. He'd get up in the middle of the night and I would just hear him screaming at her for hours. And it would just never end. And then as I got older, he started involving me. So my mom would come into my bedroom and wake me up and say, "Hey, we gotta go." And in the middle of the night, I would be brought into a room and he would just yell at me too. And so I would be involved in it. And then that was mixed with what I call spiritual abuse, because he believed himself to be a prophet and an apostle, like that he was sent to this world to save it. So he saw himself as like a big leader. And so that was mixed with also him telling us that God was talking to him and giving us instruction. And so everything was controlled. I wasn't allowed to do anything. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. I was trapped in my own home. Again, during a time period, a very pivotal transition time period in my life. A lot was expected of me at home, just to be perfect all the time, make no mistakes. And then just that type of environment. And that got more intense as the years went by. And so mine was prolonged for like 10 years. Mm-hmm. And like I said, so I was forced to stay awake a lot. There were many years in a row where like I wasn't allowed to sleep more than sometimes 3 or 4 hours. I would be woken up every night to either pray or to, be a part of an argument that my parents were having, try to help solve that. And so that did a lot for me as far as like safety. It was also a secret. I didn't talk to anyone about it. Nobody really knew this was happening to me. My family didn't even know where I was. I was not allowed to talk to my family. For 10 years, I was like kind of like a missing person, as you could say, for my family. I mean, and this is all while my mother is with me the whole time. So, she didn't know how to protect me. She didn't know how to really step in and be a mom. She just, all she understood was that she didn't have to be alone in this. So she would always say she was just so happy to have me there. So again, there's a lot of, pivotal ages, and it's a lot of manipulation and control, pretty typical of like of a cult leader. And then in later years, my stepdad actually like started a church and had followers and did like the real cult thing where you have like people who are part of it, and you have this inner circle and secrets, and only certain people know about certain secrets and all that. There's layers. If you know anything about cults, it's all layers. Anytime I watch anything about cults, I'm like, that's basically my life. When I was 23, somebody took interest in what was going on with me, figured out what was happening, and a traveling minister who had come to speak at our church had been there several times, recognized what was going on, and I was friends with her son, and he basically was like, Mom, we got to help this girl. She's basically trapped, and she's a friend of mine, and she sat me down at dinner and like took me out to dinner and sat me down and basically was like, I've seen this scenario a million times. I know what's happening. This is how you get out. And I basically ran away. And then exposed the church and had to expose everything that was going on the inside to everybody on the outside. So like my whole life and all the things I was experiencing and all the abuse, like just like got ripped open. And I had to, which is really hard, is like you have to tell everybody everything. So you have this moment of like complete exposure where there is nothing personal, because you have to use the trauma that has been happening to you to get people to realize how dangerous the situation is, and to save people from it. So I had to completely expose. And then some people know, I moved in with a family named the Burkles. They took me in because I basically was a runaway at 23. And they housed me and, facilitated me for 4 years and nursed me back to health, both mentally and emotionally. And I was part of their family. They had 4 kids who were just a little bit younger than me, but kind of spread over 5 or 6 years. And so that was like what I had been through. And it took years. It took probably about 2 to 3 years to start feeling like a normalcy. And to, not be, I was so anxious all the time. Because when you live in abusive homes, your anxiety level is at the top all the time. You're always like, you're waiting for something bad to happen.
Yeah.
Because you always have to be prepared. The worst thing you can do is be blindsided by someone who's like a rageaholic. Because they're going to come at you, and they're going to come at you hard, and they're going to come at you with questions, and you're going to have to answer for things. And the questions aren't made to be answered. They're made to confuse you and to put you in fear and to make sure that you cannot defend yourself. So being in all that, right? Yeah. So that life is like 10 years back for me. I'm turning 33 this year. So this is like my 10-year anniversary. That life is 10 years back. I've been through therapy, been through counseling. Most people who meet me now have no idea that that's what I went through. I don't share it regularly. It's not like, I'm like, hi, I'm Alia. I was raised in a cult. What's your favorite color?
Yeah.
It's not something that I talk about all the time. I usually talk about it when it becomes very relevant. And in this instant, it's relevant. So I had just gotten to a place in my life where I wasn't feeling anxious anymore. And I was feeling really safe, and I was feeling really good. And I just ended like this really great 6 months of therapy, and I was feeling so centered with who I was, and realizing like, wow, I don't have to be afraid every day. And then this all started happening, and all of a sudden, all that old anxiety started to bubble up inside of me.
Yeah.
And is that something that you started to experience as well?
Yeah, it kind of triggered a very specific part of that night for me. And I think that is what the current state of our world really kind of shakes down for me.
Right. Which specific part?
So right before Jake Owen was going to go on stage, there was a girl and her mom there that we were all in such close quarters, standing in this, huge audience, that we had kind of chatted with here and there through the evening. And the girl was maybe around my age, maybe a little bit younger. but young, a young girl. And I like to think of myself as young still, so we'll go with that. Um, but she was a little taller than I was, and could kind of see around her. But during Jake Owen's performance, she noticed that I was like visibly crazy fangirling around her, trying to get all these pictures of Jake Owen. So, um, Jake Owen came and went, and there was this lull before Jason Aldean was supposed to come on stage. And she, who had been standing in front of me for the entire night, asked if I wanted to change places with her
Oh,
so that I
wow.
could see Jason Aldean
Yeah.
better. And I was so grateful because that was, a, basically a complete stranger to me. And it was just such a kind, sweet gesture. And she was the first person I saw get shot.
Oh, wow.
I I didn't see a lot of the faces of other people that I saw go down because a lot of it was while I was running, and they were all running as well. Um, in the first moments that we got up to run, she got shot in virtually the place that I had been standing in all day. I later learned that she was one of the 58 people that died. So one of the biggest things that I struggled with, aside from the trauma of the event itself, was feeling a lot of guilt
Right.
and not understanding why in that moment I was moved out of that spot, given the chance to have my life.
And I think
Um,
that's what trauma does is
mhm.
all I can do is describe is that feeling inside when you feel so exposed and unsafe from all sides.
Yes.
And you feel like everything that you're something that necessarily is not threatening all of a sudden feels very threatening.
Right.
And I think the hard part is that you don't other people aren't feeling threatened by those things. So when you tell somebody,
Yeah.
I'm feeling this way, or you express to someone how you're doing, um, it doesn't relate to them, and they can't
Mhm.
understand why you would feel that way because to them they're like, we're all going to be fine. This is all going to be okay. And
Mhm.
they just want you to stop.
Right.
They don't want you to feel afraid anymore. And I think that was such a struggle with me and my husband during this time because he didn't want me to feel that way anymore, but I couldn't just, he couldn't just make it go away for me.
Right.
So, something that I wanted to talk a little bit more about, Michelle, was that, we keep using this word like feeling unsafe, feeling like
Yes.
we're not safe, but for us it's more than that, right?
Yeah, and I think that part of what gets misconstrued a lot during this time is that how could you possibly feel unsafe when you're home,
Right.
you have your family, and even in my case, like my husband is home from work, working from home, my children are all home, and how could you possibly still feel unsafe?
Right. Like how could you look at this situation and think the worst is kind of what people are telling me when I tell them like, look, you guys don't understand. Like my husband hasn't been working. People aren't working. People are
Mhm.
losing their job. There's a
Mhm.
lot going on and I keep I keep telling my husband like why aren't people reacting more? And I get it. I
Right.
get it. I have a sensitivity to safety, so I think I react a lot more on the front end. But he was saying the other day, maybe it's because we haven't really felt it yet. We haven't really
Right.
felt as a community the effects. We see things happening every day. Things are changing. I was talking to a group the other day about on a Zoom about how people are actually becoming less socially aware around them of others, and they're ignoring people.
Hmm.
Like walking by someone and they purposely don't look at you. They don't want to. If they acknowledge you, then they have to engage in a conversation. If they engage in a conversation, you might get too close to them.
Hmm.
And so, that as a society, in my opinion, over a long period of time is going to have an effect.
And not a good effect.
Yeah.
Not an effect like, oh, everybody's just going to be looking out for themselves and
Right.
good and yeah. No. The opposite effect,
Right.
which I think the point is behind that effect is the problem that we're having now with people taking this seriously as they should. It's
Right.
because it's supposed to essentially be for the greater good. Yeah, people tend to not take things as serious if it doesn't impact them personally.
Right.
So you don't get that unsettling feeling of it not being safe for you because it hasn't really impacted you that much.
Right. A lot of people went out and bought, a lot of supplies. We bought supplies. And I was telling
Mhm.
someone the other day, I'm like, we haven't really used them. And there's not, I mean, I ate green beans for a week, but like, why? Why did I eat green beans for a week? Because, like, if
Right.
I wanted to go to the store, there's still broccoli there. And
Yeah.
there's still other fresh vegetables. And that part, I'm like, that really didn't come into play. I have enough flour to make 400 cakes. But,
Yeah.
like, I don't need that. And I
Yeah.
haven't had to need it yet. So that part's a little confusing. But the part that, so that part is like, I don't know where to really put that. But the
Yeah.
part that gets me every day is that, I'm stuck in my home and I
Mhm.
feel unsafe. And when I get depressed or I get anxious, there is nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
There's nothing I can physically change about the world, about my own experience, except
Mhm.
me. And it was actually worse for me when my husband was home every day, not because I don't love him being around, I do, but because it was this constant reminder that everything is changing.
Yeah.
And for
That's a good
me,
point.
yeah, everything looking different means there's variables. And when
Yeah.
you have experienced trauma, variables are not good.
No.
Things that you can't control and directions and outcomes that you can't control make
Mhm.
you feel unglued,
Yes.
right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's also a trickle down effect because kind of like you were speaking to earlier about like I think you used your husband as an example and him just wanting to kind of make those feelings go away for you.
Right.
And when really the hardest thing is to be able to work through those feelings and when you have the constant reminder around you of what is still triggering those feelings, it's a very vicious cycle
Yeah.
that you wake up and endure over and over again each day.
Right.
And it kind of all circles back to that feeling of this event that our entire world is living through right now, triggering past trauma for me and wondering why why isn't it having this effect on everyone? Well, not everyone has experienced a past trauma. Some people are living through this as the first intensely traumatic experience they've ever been through.
Right.
And
And later
some
in their life,
people,
yeah, they'll feel it.
yeah, they'll experience something else traumatic, most likely, and this event will be triggering for them. So it's just this kind of cycle
Yeah.
that you keep feeling like there's a peak in it where it's a good moment, a good few moments in the day, but that's the thing about a cycle is it's going to always go back.
Right. And I
Um,
feel myself cycling through a lot of familiar feelings. So there
Mhm.
will be days where I feel really depressed, and I feel depressed, and I'm kind of like a self seeker. I'm like, why am I feeling this way? What's going on? Why do I feel depressed?
Mhm.
I'm not one of those people who just feels depressed and eats a bunch of food and then like binges. I mean, I might do that for a little bit, but
Yeah.
I don't live there. Because of everything I've been through, I've learned that if I don't work through it, nothing
Mhm.
changes for me.
Right.
I spiral too quickly and too hard. So, in order for me to find the other side, I have to find it quick.
Yeah.
And so I become very curious about what's going on. My husband has to listen to me hypothesize about what is going on with me psychologically. What am I thinking? Where am I? I have to sit there and kind of process it out loud and in
Mhm.
my head, to figure out exactly what's happening to me. So for me, a lot of the days, I would feel really depressed, and then I would just sit there and like, okay, what is it? What is the core of my depression today? And
Right.
sometimes it was just this feeling of like, okay, I am realizing that we may be forced to change our lifestyle,
Mhm.
which doesn't sound like, okay, wow, whoop de doo. But, we might be forced to change things about the way we live every day. Well, when you live in a dangerous home,
Mhm.
it takes years to feel safe in your own home again, even when your abuser is gone.
Yeah.
And it took me
Absolutely.
years to feel okay at home. I used to have the hardest time being home alone, especially. I would get so much anxiety
Mhm.
because home, when you get abused in home, the house is just this constant reminder of a cage that you live in.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so when you find a place to live where you feel safe and you feel comfortable and you like things and you have constant positive reminders, the house we live in now, I really like. I mean, it's silly to say, like, I like the way it's laid out. And
Mhm.
it's easier for me to do housework, or like it's easier for me to interact with the kids. That is a positive thing about this home that made it easier for me to feel good here.
Mhm.
Or it's easy to clean. The things like that are
Right.
positive reminders. Where my old house, which was a very old house, things that were not either safe or were difficult would be this constant negative reminder. And it would bring up
Right.
these negative feelings of, I don't like where I live.
Mhm.
And so for me to say something simple like, what if we have to change? What if we have to move? Because what if the economy crashes and we can't afford to live here anymore and we have to downgrade?
Mhm.
Really, that is, now you're taking me out of something I have built time and effort and energy into feeling safe. And now you're
Right.
ripping me away from that, which only reminds me of being ripped from my own home. So
Right.
again, there's a lot for some of us who have experienced these things. There's a lot of layers
Mhm.
that goes to this, and it might sound like, okay, wow, like what's the big deal? No one's forcing you to move, but we don't know. That's the thing.
Yeah,
Is like,
that's the trigger behind it is the unknown.
yeah,
The fear of the unknown and the inability to control what you don't know. You
right,
can't you can't for certain say, oh, well, this is all going to end April 30th. So as long as we get to April 30th, you will be fine. And it
right,
doesn't, the this pandemic doesn't work like that. And healing from trauma certainly doesn't work like that. So when
right,
you kind of compound the two, you can't say, okay, so I see the finish line in mind. I can visualize it. So, okay, I can prepare step by step to get there. You can't do that in a situation like this. You certainly can't do that in a situation where there is any type of abuse going on. You never see an end to it. So, for it to have um, those types of layers that you're referring to, the bottom layer is always going to be that fear of the unknown.
right, right. Because
And
you've learned how to, well, over time. So I'd say this:
yes.
over time, you learn that everything happens in layers for you, because everything is a reminder, is a reminder, is a reminder. And that's kind of how the
Mhm.
brain works, so to say,
Yes.
is is that it builds these memories, these
Mm-hmm.
synapses and these memories, and then it attaches. I used to go to a brain counselor. She was really awesome. And she taught me about the brain. And I think it's the amygdala. I think it's the amygdala. Actually, will put like an alert on that memory and kind of wrap it in like, okay, the stress level of this memory, like from a scale of 1 to 10 is like an 11.
Mm-hmm.
And when you experience something, your brain relays back and asks itself, like, have we been through this before? What does this
Yes.
remind us of? And then if your brain asks, your amygdala goes back and asks, and your brain's like, oh, the last time this happened, this was an alert 11. Now protect
Right.
yourself. Either run
Mm-hmm.
away, freeze completely, or fight
Yes.
at an 11 level. And then you actually react that way unbeknownst to you, and that's the alert that's happening to you.
Right.
And so you have very little control over that relay unless you've been through therapy and counseling where you've learned to go back and kind of make acceptances and peace with those, or you've processed a lot of what you went through. Then that lowers that chance of it becoming a trigger, and that's basically how triggers work.
Right. And
That
so
was a very sloppy explanation, but that's kind of how it works. So in this situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening.
Yeah. And I know you have seen the movie Inside Out.
Yes, but I
That
just
is
watched it yesterday.
that is a very, albeit in cartoon form, a very accurate a very accurate depiction of what happens in the mind.
Right.
And I think one of the things that is kind of that's very interesting really about that movie is how accurately it shows the complexity of those memories. Not every memory is just sad or just joyful. There are memories that kind of encompass both those feelings.
Right.
And I noticed that one of the things that I am dealing with now is that it's kind of that feeling of being scared, and so scared that it makes me angry because it's that fear of the unknown.
Right.
So I'm noticing myself getting like more snippy with my husband or my kids, and I'm thinking I'm not angry at them.
Right. They're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah, they're not doing anything wrong. It's me being so fearful inside of not knowing what's happening, of that feeling of losing safety that is making me anxious, and therefore it's frustrating. It's a frustrating feeling because it's not something in my control. It's that unknown. It's that variable that is out there that you can't do anything about. And the other thing that movie makes me think about a lot is also the experience that my kids are therefore having.
Right.
Initially for our oldest in first grade, it's kind of like this extended vacation. She really hasn't been, or wasn't initially, as affected by it. It hasn't been until recently where she's like, oh, I'm not going to dance class anymore.
Right,
Oh, I'm
right.
not seeing all my friends at school anymore. So it's this new kind of processing it with her too, and how it's okay to be feeling those things. And, just because your sister's not, or just because your dad's not feeling the same way, it's okay.
Right. And it's kind of like, so I think of it as well, is that the quarantine, the part thing that's hard about that and not being able to connect with others as much is like, it reminds me of the isolation I felt both during the traumatic time of my life where nobody knew what was going on with me, and after, when I had a really hard time relaying what happened to me and people connecting to what I was experiencing, because
Yes.
their lives were so different than mine. I was living with this awesome family, but the kids that I talked to every day, I mean, they were like in high school. I remember Sarah, sweet Sarah, she's an adult now, but she was like 13 when I moved in. And we used to talk, and she was so sweet. She would ask if she could pray for me. and she'd be like, let's pray together about what we went through today.
Mhm.
And I remember this one day where she was like, how was your day? And I was like, well, I didn't sleep all night. I was up all night with anxiety. And then I think I fell asleep around 5 a.m. I slept for a couple hours, got up, couldn't function. And I was like describing this like super traumatic
Yeah.
day. And she's like, oh my God, I had a bad day too. I dropped my books in front of all these people. And again, not a comparison, but a comparison. She was trying to relate to me, and
Right.
that felt so good because someone was trying to understand me, but it was isolating at the same time because nobody really could understand what I was going through. Um,
Right.
and and that's what's happening again. Is
Mhm.
my husband the other day, he had a really bad day, and the poor thing. In the morning, I was like, "You're having a bad day. I see it on your face. You're not okay today." And he was like, "I
Yeah.
really don't want to talk about it." And I was like, "Normally, I would not let that go, but I'm going to let you not talk about it." And then he was
Mhm.
like crabby all day, like being
Oh.
just little snippets. And at the end of the day, I think I was like, "That's it. I let this go too far. It's
Yeah.
my fault. I let this go way too far. You were in a bad mood and I didn't make you talk about it. And I and it's because we deal with things differently. He needed the day
Right.
to kind of process it. And me, when I feel something, because I think I used to keep everything in for so long, it feels so good to get it off of me.
Yes.
I want to talk about it. And so, that's also a reminder is the isolation is really hard for
Yeah.
me.
So one of the biggest things that I struggled with when I first came or first was home from Las Vegas was not wanting to talk about it
Mm,
because it felt too much too much like I was reliving it every
right, right,
time I told it. I was in a fair amount of shock for a while where it didn't affect me mentioning parts of it, like affect me at all,
right.
which was still just that shock wearing off. But what was most isolating about that time period was the fact that I was still processing all of these waves of various emotions, not wanting to go to sleep because I was having nightmares every single night,
Wow.
reliving it, and needing to sleep at the same time because it was the only chance I had to for my brain to possibly turn off to where I wasn't experiencing it.
And you still had
And
two little kids at home.
yes, very, very little, but just old enough to obviously understand that mommy had been through something awful.
Right, right.
And um, my husband was just feeling so helpless,
Mm,
and it it drove a wedge between us for a while where I was just really distant, not because he was not able to be there for me, but more so out of um, this protective instinct almost, where
right.
if I don't share, then no one else is being traumatized by my experience, and I'm not being further traumatized by reliving it. And that's a very scary and alone place to be in when you're processing any kind of trauma, is
Right.
that feeling of um, not wanting to talk about it. And fortunately, my background is all in marriage and family therapy.
Right.
So I had kind of the wherewithal to know that I needed to get help to process that trauma right away. So I eventually made myself and thankfully set myself up for um, for being on a good road to processing it in a healthy way.
And I really relate to that. Not that I am trained as an MFD or have a master's or anything, but I know a lot about psychology. I've done a lot of self-teaching, and we've talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
I need to go back to school and get it so that I can stop feeling like a fake. But I know a lot about it because of everything I went through, and just it's always been something I've been so interested in my life. So I know I know how to handle people. I really do when they go through something traumatic. Mm-hmm. More so because I know what I went through and I know what I, had to use to get out of it. Anyways, but like
the best therapists are trauma survivors.
Right. That's so true. But the hard part is my husband is not a therapist. I'm sure yours isn't either, right?
No.
He's not a therapist. And so I remember telling my husband when I would have these like really, especially like the traumatic experiences or the where the trauma comes up and you have this like now outward physical thing that's happening to you, whether you're crying uncontrollably or you can't breathe or you feel like the room is spinning or you feel like someone is after you, like all these things. And I would have to talk him through while I was crying what to do with me. Yeah. Because he would freeze because he wouldn't know, he's not he doesn't know what to do with a person who used to say, like, he used to call it when he thought I was broken.
Yeah.
Not like broken, like you're broken, like somebody came and smashed me, like I'm a broken toy or something.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't know what to do with me, and I would still like walk him through, like, okay, so you need to do this or say this, or maybe we should talk about this. That'll really help me get out of it. And so, there's a it's funny because you almost know what you need.
Yes.
But you don't live with a therapist. So like you only usually get to go like a few times a week or once a week. So you still have to live during all that other time.
Yes.
And function.
Yes. And not always well.
Right. And not always well. And when you have littles, you basically have these like, because I have two littles, yours are a little older than mine. But you constantly have these variable, unpredictable people in your life. Yeah. Who... And
they create all their own set of chaos that you deal with each day. So your focus is not... It's not like, I came home and my focus could just be on recovering.
Right.
There was this constant back and forth where... Okay, you have to find a way to switch that off somehow because you have these little kids that need you.
Right. Sometimes need you because they're crying or they're screaming or they're fighting. And just, I had a lot more of a break in between my trauma and children than you did. I had about, it was like 6 or 7 years of a break. But like sometimes when you have two children screaming or crying at the same time and you're feeling high anxiety... Is it literally like your brain just all the levels of anxiety, everything just goes up.
Oh yeah.
And
everything is triggered like instantaneously.
Yes.
Yeah.
And especially for you, you have a noise trigger, right?
Yes.
You have you and I went to Disneyland together.
We did.
And when the fireworks went off, we couldn't see them. And your noise trigger went off. And, hearing you retell the story now, I know we talked about it then, but hearing you retell it now of like hearing what you thought were fireworks, but not being able to see them. That was like an exact replica moment. And thankfully you were with me, and I'm an untrained professional. And
exactly.
I knew enough about, what you had been through and everything, and we're friends. So like I felt very comfortable in that moment to be like, what's going on? And, what are you experiencing? What is it that's, triggering you right now? But, those moments happen and you don't get to predict them.
No, you can't predict them. I have been able to go to like fireworks shows since then, but I know it's coming. Right. I'm for lack of a better way of saying it, mentally prepared to see the fireworks. Right. Which, something I completely took for granted prior to that night. Yeah. But it's kind of in one of those, going back to that unknown factor. I don't think that it helps, of course, that I didn't see any of this situation that the world is in right now coming. I don't
Right.
know that anyone could have predicted that things would get this bad this fast, or this dire this fast.
Right.
And that's been the other thing, that it kind of completely blindsided us, and we weren't prepared for such a thing. And even in those first few moments of hearing how people were like intensely panic buying things, I was like, okay, I have things that I need. And then as soon as I started running low on something, it triggered this
Oh my
intense
gosh, yeah.
panic. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, no, I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared at all. It just went from bad to way worse so fast.
Yeah.
And it it again just kind of gets re-emphasized by the experience that I went through, and how I went from so happy and enjoying such a wonderful evening to the worst night of my life.
Right. You go from this incredibly happy time to this incredibly, and when you mix, I think when you mix feelings like that,
Mm-hmm.
when you mix memories, and even I've heard this before that like the brain doesn't know how to deal with it.
No.
And so it labels it like a very, the brain actually likes to label things very general because it's easy to categorize generalities versus like very complex.
Right.
So you kind
Mm-hmm.
of like wrap a memory. I remember somebody asked me one time, like, well, did you ever have any happy times with your stepdad? And I
Mm.
did, but it hurts my brain. Like literally hurts
Yeah.
to try to remember something good because so much of that time was wrapped in so much bad and so
Right.
much mistreatment and so many hurtful words and so many
Mm-hmm.
watching my mom, be so injured both mentally and emotionally constantly and
Mm-hmm.
so much fear and anxiety. I remember being in my room and just shaking, like
Yeah.
uncontrollably shaking because I could hear him screaming at my mother and I would freeze and I couldn't get out of I was like, I couldn't decide whether to get out of the room to go help and be there
Mm-hmm.
and I would just get stuck or like hide in a closet somewhere, and I was like maybe 20 at the time. And I would just
Right.
stand there and shake uncontrollably.
Wow.
So the moments like those, now I'm trying to think back of like a good thing that maybe me and my stepdad, because there were years where him and I got along really well. He was
Mm-hmm.
still very abusive to me and I wasn't like safe from the abuse, but I was safer if I was
Right.
on his side and if I spent time with him. He would see me
Mm-hmm.
as an ally and then he would only attack my mother. But then I
Yeah.
could kind of buffer that and kind of like be the, in between and kind of keep him happy all the time and really control my environment that way.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was like, when somebody asked me, like, I remember the other day, I was like, I'm really good with money. I'm really good with balancing checkbooks and seeing finance. Well,
Mm-hmm.
my stepdad taught me that. I remember him sitting me down and teaching me how money works. And this is how we save. And this is how we balance. He used to make me balance a
Yeah.
checkbook in high school, like the
Yeah.
$50 I owned. And I'm still really good at money these days. A lot of the techniques I know are from him. And they were good
Right.
memories.
Yeah.
But my brain can't separate them. It can
Okay.
only label 10 years of my life as bad. And
Yeah.
I have to specifically go in and try to pull out something good. And then it still feels really strange and conflicting to have a nice moment. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what most people don't understand is like a lot of these things we're feeling is because our brain is like, all it knows is the facts like, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
There's something dangerous happening. I need
Yeah.
to get you out.
Exactly.
And
It's like, I remember this place, something bad, run away, and there's nowhere to run to.
or like, yeah, right. There's nowhere. Yeah, and like my husband, we had a bunch of paper we had to do this morning, and it was kind of frantic. We were on a timeline, and it felt really good to do something frantic and on a timeline
Hmm.
because everything else was like, hey, someone's chasing you. It's like a dream where you can't run. Your like
Yeah.
feet are in mud. It's like someone's
Yeah.
chasing you, but guess what? You can't run. You're standing still.
Yeah.
And that's what this
Yeah.
time feels like for me. Is someone is after you. There's danger right there, and
Hmm.
you can't even do anything about. All you can do is sit at home and do nothing.
Right.
And that conflict that's happening inside of me, that's where the anxiety and the depression come in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's
So I guess we can ask the next question is how are we So,
wow.
how do we, knowing all these things that we've talked about, like how do we deal with these things? How do
Right.
we take care of ourselves in a way that we, get out of this?
The best ways that I've been coping so far, and well, I already shared one, has been writing.
Right.
A little bit each day, and it serves as not only, it's not only a therapeutic outlet for me, but I also think of like our youngest two, who will look back on this someday and be like, "What? I don't remember that." And I'll be like, "Oh, look here, mommy wrote about it every day. I remember all about it. Let me share with you." And that it's been helpful. Some
Right.
days it's kind of grounding
Mhm.
because I feel like all I have to write about is, wow, this was a really terrible day. I felt awful all day. I
Right.
felt trapped. I, you know, all sorts of very concerning feelings. And it still feels better to have gotten them out on paper than it
Right.
does to have just kept it in. I'm like, the best way to start feeling not trapped when you can't do anything is to write about feeling trapped,
Oh
because
my gosh,
then at
yes.
the very least, the feelings are getting out.
Right.
Um,
Because otherwise they just bounce around and
exactly.
repeat over and over and over. Yeah.
Exactly. The other thing, and it's really, really silly, um, I think maybe in the grand scheme of things, but because I've seen all over social media all the jokes about, all I did today was change from my nighttime pajamas to my daytime pajamas and then back to my
Right.
I make myself get up and get ready every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the biggest instant mood lifter. I don't generally wear a lot of makeup, so that's not a huge issue for me in
Right.
my in
Yeah, in your
regular
regular
life,
schedule. Yeah, yeah.
pre-quarantine life. But I put on regular clothes. I make sure I do my hair, and that really is not
You do your
a
hair?
challenge for me.
You
You
don't
can't
do
see me
your
doing
hair.
air quotes right now. I do my hair, which doesn't mean for me what it probably does
For
for the
anyone
average
else.
woman.
Yes. Yes. You kind of
But
brush it, touch it,
exactly,
make sure it's not a
exactly,
mess. Yes. Well,
exactly,
yeah, I'm in
and
the same boat as you. I don't
yeah,
really, I mean, previous to being pregnant, I, obviously put more effort in. If I go somewhere, I do my hair,
right.
I do at least my makeup. But being really pregnant, I don't really do my hair or makeup every day.
Yeah.
It's like the longest stint in my life of like not, and I don't go to work anymore either. When I used to work, I at
Uh-huh.
least did it, but no, that's not there. So yeah, but I shower every morning, and I do I
Hmm.
do that every morning, usually the first thing.
Yeah.
Me, the kids, everybody gets clean, everybody gets fresh clothes. And
Yeah.
unfortunately for me, my day wear, because I'm pregnant, everything's stretchy, is also my night wear. So I
That's okay though.
sleep in my day wear, but it's kind of a middle ground because for me, because all my shirts are stretchy, all my pants are
Uh-huh.
stretchy. So when I'm like
Uh-huh.
time to get ready for bed, it means I like walk from the living room to my bedroom.
Yes.
I'm already
Which
in
in
stretchy enough clothes.
Yes. And when you're done at the end of the day, like really, really done, that's kind of a relief.
Yeah.
It's kind
Oh
of a
yes,
relief. You're like, I can go to sleep in this.
yeah. Oh, I thought you were gonna
It
say it's a
works.
relief for the day to be over. I was
Oh,
telling
that
Voss,
too.
I was telling Voss today, like the hardest thing is the days are so much longer now,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing as when you're anticipating something coming, like when you're having a
Uh-huh.
baby, because that's what's happening to me, and you're like can't wait for it to come. Every day just feels like a check mark. You're like, yay, this one's over, yay, this one's over,
Yes.
and yay, this one's over, or like when you're ending a school program, or where
Uh-huh.
something that you're looking forward to being over. I
Right.
have that same feeling now where I'm like, yay, another Monday. Woohoo! Another day
Yeah.
of quarantine over. And
Yep.
like I get this feeling at night where I'm like, oh, thank God the day's over. And then in the morning, I'm like, oh God, it's the beginning again. And so I'm like, I got to get out of this. This is not a good place to be in when I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to the end of the day so much because the days are full of so much pain and uncertainty.
Right.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't want to paint a picture that like Michelle and I are like sitting on the couch non-functioning. No, I
No.
am functioning all day. I am
Yes.
taking care of my kids. We're playing games. The feelings that I'm describing and I'm sure you're describing are happening on the inside, but the
Yes.
outside is operating really well.
Yes.
And
And that's one of the biggest things about anxiety and about living with anxiety and depression kind of in general, really,
right.
is that for the most part, you really can't always tell that somebody is struggling with those issues
Yeah, I've had
and because
one
you're
day.
functioning.
Yeah, I had one day, literally one day in this entire quarantine where I watched television. Like for an
Mhm.
extended period, it's because a show, like a new season got released of something, and I was particularly tired that day. That's it. One. I did
Yeah.
one. And, you know,
Yeah.
and it's not because I don't give myself a break. It's because it's healthier and better for me to have more of an active day and to pick
Right.
moments to relax for me than to just
Yes.
veg. Vegging, I will go into depression really quick. So I have to make
Yeah.
this decision like today I'm vegging on purpose. It is a veg day and I'm finding joy in the veg. But if I
Yes.
just did that continuously every day, I would be a mess.
Oh yeah.
And I
I
have
mean
children and they
that
would be a mess too. So, okay, well, as we kind of wrap this up, I just want to say that, you know, thank you, first of all, for coming on here with me and talking with me.
my pleasure.
I know it's hard, but you know, talking about trauma, reliving some of it.
Mhm.
But I think that what other people are going to get from is they're going to hear this and they're going to maybe realize some moments that they've been having is connected
Mhm.
to trauma that they've experienced in the past.
Mhm.
And what I think is so helpful to people is when they have feelings that are unexplained that become explained.
Yeah.
That's a great transition because even though you don't get rid of it, you don't feel crazy or you don't feel isolated in it anymore.
Right. Right.
And you can think about it on in a more like a full level where you're like, wow, that makes sense. I'm understanding myself. And I
Yeah.
know for me, understanding myself is really big. So,
And it's already a confusing enough time without questioning why you're feeling certain ways as well. I
right,
mean, I think it's important to remember that regardless of if you lived through a traumatic experience prior to this coronavirus pandemic or not, there's still a certain amount of trauma that you're living through now. And people are experiencing that in a variety of different ways. So there doesn't have to be the added confusion of why am I feeling like this? You know, I'm safe at home, or you know, that type of confusion. This is a traumatic experience that's being felt across the world,
right,
a globally shared trauma that everyone is experiencing in very different ways.
right,
And it's okay to have days where you're not okay. It's okay to feel like it's a huge relief that you made it to the end of that day. It's okay to have a day where you're like, wow, this was really easy. Those are all normal experiences for something like this.
right. And I think that in response to that, those are all really amazing points. Is to say that if you are feeling those things, if you are feeling more than you think you should be, or if you're struggling with a lot of ups and downs, is
Mm-hmm.
to start talking about it
Yes.
and trying to find somebody who's safe to talk to about it. Because sometimes when you have feelings and you try to express to someone and they don't get it, you can feel worse
Mm-hmm.
and you can feel shut down. And it
Yes.
really takes, I was trying to talk about it to other people like friends and I wasn't really getting anywhere. And then I was on a Zoom call with like 50 women for a group that I'm part of. And one gal just shared her experience of how she felt like she was going through a time of grief. And
Mm-hmm.
then like a few people later, it was my turn to talk. And guess what? I burst into tears in front of 50
Yeah.
women trying to talk about how I was feeling because that just spoke so much to me.
Right.
And, you know, I was really surprised how many people like privately messaged me later and checked in on me and taught, you know, just
Mm-hmm.
understood. And not, of course, not everybody did, and not everybody knew me. But, you know,
Mm-hmm.
there's something about making yourself vulnerable to others. And yeah, it felt
Yeah.
really exposing and it was hard. And there's usually a moment after you're like, you feel kind of dumb and stupid. But you know what? There's also the relief. And I felt a lot better that day, opening up and allowing people to see it. And I'm sure other people who are maybe struggling with feeling, identifying their feelings,
Mm-hmm.
heard me, and it helped them too. So it's kind of like a
Right.
perpetual cycle. It's the
Yeah.
same. It's like a good healthy cycle that we are getting out there. So we want to
Right.
encourage you to continue to do that, to seek help if you need it, to talk to people if you need it. Heck, send me a message. I mean, I can't really counsel you, but you know, just to connect with others, to say like, I really connected with what you said. I connected with what
Yes.
you shared. And those little moments of feeling a connection do so much for us, both
Mm-hmm.
emotionally and psychologically, because we need to feel that connection. It breaks away that lie that we're completely alone in what we're experiencing.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, thank you, Michelle, for coming on today and sharing everything that you did, and giving us so much of your story.
You are welcome.
You're awesome, and I love you.
Oh, I love you too. Thank you.
All right, goodbye.
Bye.